Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really excited and honored to be back as a keynote speaker. This is something that is truly amazing for me to be here to share as much as I can with you all. And in the spirit of sharing today, I was actually reading something that I thought would be perfect to share from Judy Riley. She's the director of the Center for Neurodiversity and Employment Innovation at the University of Connecticut. And she said, the more you behave in a way and think and perceive the world in a way that's just different from how the world is structured, you become divergent. She said, neurodiversity has to do with our whole species, and it's a strength-based perspective to say, we need all of these differences, just like biodiversity exists for a reason. And I couldn't agree with her more. And I thought that was a perfect way to open it up today. And I have to say that in my 12 years of working with people from all populations or underserved or marginalized populations, there's one thing I can honestly say about the people that I've been able to support, and that's that not a single one of them are the same, right? Neither are you. Today, I'm really going to do my best in the spirit of being a helper at heart to share as much information as I can about what I know about self-advocacy, support and accommodations, and disclosure so that you guys, all of you, can set yourself up for success in the workplace and beyond. So moving right along to the next slide. So who am I? Why am I here speaking? And what's my background? So I'm the director of the Grow Group. And we're a nonprofit organization in Tampa, Florida, helping individuals from marginalized populations with finding and retaining meaningful employment throughout the state of Florida. And actually tomorrow we're celebrating our 14th year. We help big box employers and small business owners with workforce development and DEI initiatives. And then we also work one-on-one with individuals with disabilities to help them find and maintain meaningful employment. In addition to my director of operations role, I am also a job coach and have been a job coach for the last 12 years. So working one-on-one with those clients and to helping them with finding employment or retaining employment as well. So again, today we're going to be covering some topics: self-advocacy, support and accommodations, and then of course, awareness and disclosure. So the most important topic, and I have notes here, so if you see me looking down, it's just because I need my notes, as we just talked about, right, Sadie? Self-advocacy. What is self-advocacy? It's the ability to communicate, express, and act on one's own needs, your interests, your rights, and your desires. It's an important skill that can be used throughout your life and includes being assertive, knowing your rights, and negotiating. And so under this umbrella of self-advocacy, we're going to talk about communication as being one of the most important components and probably one of the hardest. I know that communication can be, the best thing for an organization. If you're doing it right, it can also be the worst thing for an organization and an individual. So we're going to touch on that today and just kind of talk about how you can self-advocate for yourself, how you can be your own advocate. So on my next slide, we're going to jump right in. And we're going to save the questions for the end. So I will try to finish up in time so that you all can ask me questions. I'm happy to answer those for you. But in order to advocate for yourself, you need to know yourself. So who are you? What works for everyone is not always going to work for you. So just as I said, every single person here is different from the person next to them. And you need to know that. Like, what are your differences? How do you communicate? What are your communication preferences? Do you prefer email? Do you prefer phone? Do you prefer group messaging, one-on-one meetings, team meetings? What is your preferred method of communication? Those are going to be important for you when you're going into a meeting or when you're going into a work environment. So can you ask for those specific methods of communication? If you know you're going to be going into a team meeting with a bunch of other people and you're really nervous about that, can you be the first one to suggest the format that you're using? So maybe you're not really comfortable with Slack. Like, I'm really not that good at Slack. I always get lost in there. So I might be the first one to say, hey, can we use GroupMe instead? Or I might be the first one to say, like, can we use a live Google Doc instead and just kind of comment on there? Instead of meeting every week virtually, can we just kind of give each other feedback in that document? So maybe you can be the first one to say, this is the platform that I prefer, and see if everybody else on the team is okay with that, right? So those are some really good ways to kind of outline your communication preferences and then to see if the team is okay with using those type of communications, right? If not, and say your boss is like, guess what? We're all going on Zoom tomorrow at 10 a.m. How are you going to prepare, right? Without getting flustered and, reacting and being nervous and having anxiety about having to be on a Zoom screen with 908 other people today, what are some things that can set you up for success before you attend that meeting? Some things that you might want to do is ask for the agenda ahead of time, right? They did a great job of showing you what's on the lineup today, but in a meeting with your team, that might be something that will alleviate your anxiety or your stress, is if knowing what you're going into. Is there going to be an icebreaker? I know that a lot of people get really nervous or they don't want to share, you don't want to turn your screen on, those type of things. So maybe asking your manager or the team, the person that's facilitating the meeting, if there's going to be an icebreaker. And if there is it possible for you to be a few minutes late and maybe skip out on the icebreaker? Or can you practice with a friend or family member the night before for that icebreaker and get yourself ready so that you're not thrown off guard by what they ask you? So again, knowing your specific communication strengths, like what is the way that you communicate the most effectively? How can you share that with the team? How can you suggest that as a mode of communication? And how can you adapt to what's already being used? So, what about your strengths? So, self advocacy is not just communication, it also has to do with your strengths. So, being able to advocate, right, through communication, but then also being able to make yourself shine, right? How can you identify and explain the things that you're great at? What have you been told that you're great at? Or what do you feel the most confident doing? Right. Some people are like, I don't even know what my strengths are. When I practice interview prep with clients, they're always like, I have no idea. I'm like, well, what comes really easy to you? And sometimes they'll say like, oh, well, Microsoft Excel. And I'm like, are you serious? That's easy for you? That's a strength, because that is not easy for me. There's no way. Like, I have to look up every formula that I use on YouTube, even copy and paste sometimes. So that can be considered a strength, right? What are some other things that like your previous employer has told you you're good at? Do you have work references that you can go back to? Can you go on LinkedIn and ask for some recommendations from people that you've worked with, or even people that you've gone to school with, old teachers, old professors? Can you get their feedback? Asking a friend or family member, like, hey, what would you say I'm really good at work or even at home? Do you have any awards or recognitions? What are the things that make you you? What are the things that you're great at that don't necessarily feel like work to you, that come naturally? And then how can you share these? So how can you share your strengths in a meaningful way? Some ways that like are just kind of pen and paper, tangible things, are letters of recommendation. So going to an interview with a letter of recommendation, or if you're up for a promotion, or if you're interested in a new job and a lateral move at your company, can you get those recommendations from your coworkers or previous peers or coworkers that you worked with in the past? Um, if you still don't know, or you're like, I really have asked everybody, they're kind of just saying like little bits and pieces, I really don't know what my thorough, comprehensive strengths are, then can you look for a career aptitude test? There's lots of them online. There's lots of different resources for these. One that I use a lot of times with clients is on ONET, and it's onet.org. They have a website called My Next Move, and that you can plug in your job title and it will tell you the education path. It'll tell you the strengths that you need for that position. It will tell you the job tasks. I mean, it breaks it down beautifully. And then you can go in and look at the job description and say, oh yeah, check, I'm great at this. Yes, I'm awesome at this. Maybe not so much this, right? So taking a look too at the job evaluation and or the job description and evaluating it and seeing what is it on here that I know that I'm awesome at. And then some work samples or portfolios. So maybe a resume isn't the best way to show your work. I'm working with a client right now who's a 2D artist. And so we've determined that rather than just like a regular old Microsoft Word resume, we've created an online portfolio or website for him. So we're able to go to graphic artist companies and say, hey, look at, these are some of the awesome designs I've created. These are some of the companies I've worked with in the past. And then here's some tangible examples of my work. Right. So that's a really meaningful way and a different, unique way to share your work. Now, if you're switching careers, and I get this a lot, right? Especially after COVID, people were like, forget this job. Like, what am I doing in data entry? I want to get out. I want to join cybersecurity. I know there's a need there. I keep hearing more needs up for fraud these days. So a lot of people are kind of switching and going even further into like risk management, things like that. Completely different, right? Nuts and bolts compared to cybersecurity or data entry or, risk and compliance, all very different, but there are still soft skills there. And soft skills are your things like your problem solving, your critical thinking skills. Those are things that can transfer from any job. I don't care if you were working in, retail or customer service. That customer service skill that you got from talking to people, that's going to translate into your next role, no matter what it is. So what are those soft skills that you are really great at? Have you had coworkers say like, yeah, you're really solution focused. Like you always know the answer to my problems, or you always help me find the answer. That's a really good soft skill that you can share. And then there might be some hard skills too. So what you're doing right now, the ability to join Zoom, I have clients that are not able to do that. So you may not even consider this as a strength, but it is. Being able to multitask across different platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Workspace, you name it, right? That is a hard skill. It's a specific software that knowledge that you have that maybe the person next to you does not. So identifying those when you're doing your career switches or you're actually entering a career, those are really going to help you. Of course, continued education, doing your research, finding out, are there other courses that I can take? Are there continued education options for free, like Allison.org or edX, where I can take these online trainings to learn the language of the new job that I'm getting? And then lastly, identifying what are some interests and hobbies of mine, like gaming, for example. How does that translate into a work environment? Well, if you are a gamer, I know a lot of times that's like a lot of organized chaos in those video games, and you're multitasking and you're paying attention to all sorts of things. And if you're able to hone in on those things, then I would say that you have the ability to multitask or problem solve or work critically, and think fast. So even think about outside of the box, outside of work. What are some things that you like to do because you're great at them and you feel good doing them? All right. And then lastly, for self-advocacy is to anticipate your needs, right? So knowing the answers to these questions are really going to help you advocate. So do you have any sensory sensitivities, and what are those appropriate accommodations? And we're going to get into accommodations next, but identifying what those are. So is it a bright light sensitivity? Making sure that you're taking note of what's going to help you to be successful in the workplace, and understanding what those are. Do you have any movement restrictions? What are appropriate accommodations for that? So do you have physical limitations that you might need to talk to your employer about? Understanding what those needs are is going to be critical in determining what your accommodations are. Do you have trouble with processing information or executive functioning? So for example, do you need to-do lists? Like for me, I have a hard time with time management sometimes. Time escapes me, I swear. So I have a 30-minute reminder, a 20-minute reminder, a 10-minute reminder on my phone, on my watch, and then I also have a paper planner. So those are the things I know that I need to be successful in the workplace. So I'm going to set myself up for success every day by reviewing my calendar, making sure I'm writing down what my day is going to look like, and then also setting those reminders. So those are examples of ways that I'm saying proactively, what do I need to be successful in the workplace? And then if you don't know, say this is a new job, you haven't been there yet. What are some things that you might anticipate? So what are some accommodations that you've used in the past? That could be all the way back in grade school. Like, were you always having to take frequent breaks in school, or did you have to sit at the very front of the room so that you could pay attention? Those could translate now as an adult into your job. And you may not even think about that. And you're like, oh my gosh, wow, she's right. I used to always ask my teacher to go to the bathroom. I just needed to like shake off the lesson before we started social studies, or I needed to move my desk. The teacher actually moved my desk for me to the front of the room so that I'd pay attention. And that actually helped, right? That might be something that you need in a meeting. You might need to make sure you position yourself in the front of the room, okay? Or take notes and have your notebook ready at all times. And then lastly, what are your legal rights? What are the resources that are available to you now? It's very different from school when you have a lot of those resources readily available to you. Now you're in a position where you need to advocate for those. And in order to do that, you need to know what those are. So we're going to move right along into the next slide, which is going to be talking about those support and accommodations. And so we did do a poll before, and it was really helpful. So thank you to those that answered the survey that I had sent out, because it was really helpful for me to understand kind of like a general idea. So for these, again, I'm going to provide some general resources, but it's going to be up to you to research these to see what works for you, right? So these are not blanket approaches. Again, this is very individualized. It's case by case basis. So you're going to have to do your own homework here, but I'm going to provide you everything that I know and some resources. Okay. So first is your support team. Everybody should have a support team. It doesn't matter if it's one person or it's 10 people. You should have somebody in your corner. Okay. And so who can be a part of this? Who are the people? It doesn't have to be you against the world, right? There's many options out there for support. You're in it right now. this group that you're in right now, start friending these people on LinkedIn, start connecting with them because they can be part of your support team. They're all here for a reason, and most of you guys are here probably for the same reason. And so it's already creating an organic and natural support system for you. So number one, employers, we're going to talk about what to look for and what type of support employers can offer you, but they can definitely be a part of your support team. They do not have to be, you don't have to be against them. Two, building your network of support. So how can you build that network on your own outside of your friends and family that already exist, and then, that you guys like each other because you have to, right? But your network, right? How can you build your own network of people that will support you? So that can be mental health therapists, VR counselors, or therapy counselors, job coaches, mentors, peers, natural supports, right? Those are your coworkers, the people that you've, kind of organically became friends with at work that you feel a close connection with. They can be part of your support team and help you through difficult situations as well. And then, of course, your friends and family, right? How can you go to your social circles and get feedback from them? How can you connect them together, right? So how can you ensure your success by getting these people to kind of go together as one? So for example, I've been in meetings where as a job coach, my client has invited their therapist. And that's really helped me to understand some techniques for that person to be able to communicate effectively, right? So if you're really not sure, like, how can I communicate my needs, or I'm really nervous about it, and your job coach is telling you one thing, your therapist is telling you another, maybe you can bring them together and then you guys can all come up with a plan together. Same thing with, like, if you're working with VR, can you bring your mentor or your friend or your family member to those meetings with your VR counselor so that you all can be on board about a realistic approach for your employment goals, right? So these people don't have to be siloed, okay? They can work together, but again, it's up to you to bring them together and say, hey, I think if we all talk, this may be a recipe for success for me with my employment goals. Okay, so how can they help, right? Number one way that they can help you is by talking to you about your disability, right? So what does that look like? What is your disability? What is a diagnosis? What are some typical accommodations that you might need? What have they noticed about your strengths? Not weaknesses, but what is it about you that makes you unique and makes you shine? They can also help prepare you for employment. So if you have a job interview coming up, or if you have a big meeting with your boss, or you have a promotion that you want to go for, they can sit down with you and say, okay, let's look at this job description. What are the things that we're going to look in here and say, these are your strengths, these are definitely what you want to talk about. Or remember that time where you did this and you solved that problem, and you got the whole team together. That's something you should talk about, right? So they can help you prepare by helping you recall those strengths or those situations that you were in where you were like spearheading things, or you were the one that was a champion. They can help remove barriers and advocate for you. So if they say, hey, like, I know that work environment is pretty noisy for you. Is there a way that maybe you can ask for some headphones, or maybe does anybody else wear headphones at work? Maybe you can bring some in, or they can show you some resources, right? Like lead you to some websites and different organizations and different groups where you might be able to learn more about how to remove those barriers and how to advocate for yourself. So sharing information. They can help you get involved in the community. This I do often. So a lot of times if there is a job fair, or if there's a networking event, or if there's a volunteer opportunity, I usually will grab a friend, or if I have a client, I will recommend, like, hey, let's go to this job fair together. Like, do it together. Going on your own can be nerve-wracking for anybody. So I feel like if you have somebody in your support group that can go with you and attend these things, even if it's a work event. So maybe your work event is having a happy hour and you're not really into socializing in social circles, but maybe you can invite a friend and say, hey, my work is having a happy hour at 5:30. I don't really want to go. I know that it's important, but maybe you can meet me there around 5:45, and then we can kind of skate out and go somewhere else. At least you're attending, you're showing face, you're networking, but then you know that support is coming. So that's going to give you some calm and make you feel comfortable once they arrive. And then you have a reason to also head out and do your thing, so they can really be that kind of wingman or that person to help you to go out and put yourself out there and get involved. We know now, especially post-COVID, that people are just dying to network. They're dying to get in person. They want to have these, big events, and conferences are back in full swing. They're not always going to be virtual like this is today, which is wonderful for a lot of people. But that's not always going to be the case. So leaning on your support network to go to those events with you and to help kind of calm and ease your nerves, that can be really, really helpful. They can also point out different things too, like, hey, I noticed that, that's your boss over there. Why don't we go talk to him and ask him about his day? And like really like help you to get more comfortable into speaking to other people. Because the last thing we want to do is if you brought somebody with you and you just kind of pair up with them in the corner and don't talk to anybody, that's not the goal. The goal is to have them there to help you feel more comfortable so that you're able to communicate and talk to everybody or talk to the people that you need to if it's at a job fair or a promotion or something like that. And then lastly, providing those resources and information. So are they coming across like different jobs that you may be good at that you should apply to? Did they find, information about interviewing skills and interview practicing? Did they find certain certifications or continued education opportunities online, right? The more people you talk to, especially in your community, the more you're going to see these information and resources just come naturally to you, right? And again, being a part of this community today, I'm sure by attending all these events, you're going to have an overload of resources and information, which is awesome. So I commend all of you for being here today. I think it's awesome. Okay. So again, going into that support and accommodation, this is something where you need to do your own research, right? So when you're applying for a job, looking for these resources when you're researching the companies that you're interested in are really important. So do they have these things in place? The first one is the employee resource groups. And I talked about this a lot the last time I spoke. And I have to say that recently I met with some coworkers and some peers from outside the community, and we were talking about the change that we've seen in a lot of like these first three things, the A, B, and C, is that before in my job, I'd have to like, go knocking at the door to an employer and say, like, what are your DEI initiatives? Like, how are you creating an inclusive environment in your workplace? And now I feel like the pendulum has started to swing. I'm seeing a lot more companies wanting to do better and wanting to make the environment a lot more inclusive. And that is a great thing to see. So we're seeing a lot more of these employee resource groups pop up. According to Great Place to Work, Fortune 500, about 90% of Fortune 500 companies have them now. That's huge. That's a huge number. And that was in 2023. So an employee resource group, they're voluntary, employee-led organizations that foster diverse, inclusive workplaces, and they're aligned with the organization they serve. They're usually led and participated by the employees who share certain characteristics. So that can be like gender, ethnicity, religious affiliation, lifestyle, interest, disability, right? So these are kind of like these micro groups, or sometimes they're larger groups within the company that you can go to for support, right? So if you're having an issue at work or something arises, or, maybe not venting about it to everybody in the office, you can say, I'm going to save that for my resource group later and kind of talk to them about how I should handle this. So they can be a great ally for you in the workplace on, offering some support when you're having a hard day or you're faced with a difficult situation. Additionally, an employee assistance program. So an employee assistance program, these have lots of benefits to them. And these are normally where they offer resources outside of work that will help you to continue to do your job effectively when you are at work. So employee assistance programs can have things like financial resources. So financial advisors that you can talk to help you with your finances if you're having financial trouble. They may have mental health counselors, so you can go and reach out to a mental health counselor that they make available for you. They have all sorts of different types of programs that they put together, and then they offer you to participate in. So that way you're not missing work because of financial burdens that you have at home, or childcare, or mental health. You're having a really hard day. Like they are putting these programs in place so that you can access these resources out of work, so that you can come to work and feel good about it and not be worried about all the other things that you have going on. So these are also really beneficial. Some of the benefits that we see in the workplace is that it increases productivity. Employees who participate miss fewer days of work, and they're more engaged in their jobs. So really great thing if you see a company has these in place. It means they don't just care about you showing up to work. They care about everything else that's going on outside of it. Diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. Again, I'm seeing a lot more of these come up, and I think they're great. I think you want to do some digging and see what they're doing. Are they just, having something on their website, or are they actually out in the community doing some community work surrounding DEI, right? So don't just look for like kind of the bells and whistles. Really do some research and see on their social media, what are they doing for DEI initiatives? What are some of the things that they're putting in place at work? And then their reputation. So Disability In, they're having a huge conference next month in July in Vegas. But they help to put together this Disability Equality Index. And you all are going to get these slides from what I'm told after. So you'll have access to these links. You can also Google it. But this is a really awesome tool. It's a comprehensive third-party resource for annual benchmarking of corporate disability inclusion policies and programs. And it's now trusted by more than 70% of Fortune 100 and nearly half of Fortune 500 companies. So it's basically like a rating scale of a company's disability inclusion efforts. And one that I wanted to include, so I was going through the index, and one that kind of shot out at me was 3M. So they got a score of 100, and their 3M says on their website, they support employees with disabilities and their families in a number of ways. Along with physical accommodation, 3M Workforce has access to employee groups, including Disability Awareness Network and the Autism and Mental Health Resource Group. They have flexible work arrangements, education, and awareness opportunities. They also have an employee assistance program as well. So in addition to those resource groups, they're also offering an EAP, which is awesome. So those are the things you want to look at, and you can go right to this Disability Equality Index, and they've already started to rate those for you. The other thing that you can do is your own research, right? Go right to the horse's mouth. What are people saying that work there? Go on Glassdoor. You can create a free account on there, and you can actually see people will post what interview questions they were asked. Some of them may be far-fetched, but some of them might be right about the job that you're applying to, right? And then you can also see what they say about working there. What's the company culture like? Indeed now is also doing the same. They're offering different reviews, not necessarily testimonials, but reviews on like letting people star different companies and how they feel about them. Lastly, are my favorite, and this is informational interviews. An informational interview is not going in and asking for a job interview or asking for a job. So an informational interview is calling the employer and saying, hey, I really love your company. I saw that you have some jobs online, and I really wanted to get more information about those positions you have available. Do you have time to talk? Or can I come in and tour your company and meet with you? Okay, again, you're not asking for a job. You're not asking for an interview. You're just asking to know more about the company, to get more information, just like it sounds, right? This is your opportunity to ask them directly. Do you have any employee resource groups? Do you have employee assistance programs? What DEI initiatives do you have? What's the company culture like? What's a typical day of an employee look like? You know, what are some things that you all are doing in the community? What does your growth look like? What are your goals for 2024? These are things you want to know before you apply to a job, right? And so these informational interviews are a really great way to get in the door, for one, because you're able to maybe go on a company tour, which is really helpful, especially if you're trying to determine accommodations. But it's also giving you a full picture of outside of the job description that you might see online. Okay, you're actually talking to a person and getting that interaction on the phone. And if you're comfortable enough, seeing if you can go in and meet with them in person and get an idea of what the workspace might look like. So I do these frequently with my clients, and I can honestly say that the benefit is incredible. Okay, so here are some other available resources. These sites offer accommodation ideas and supports to help you with your workplace needs. The first one is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that can help you legally to understand some of the employer obligations. The ADA is the most important to familiarize yourself with. I would highly recommend that you visit the ADA. Go to their website. I also linked it at the end here for you to understand what are your accommodation rights. You know, how does the ADA protect you once you disclose disability? That's the big key there. Once you disclose, how does the ADA protect you? Ask Jan. So Ask Jan is an incredible resource. It is a resource, a website. Again, I have it linked at the end here, but you can type in your diagnoses, your specific disability, and it will tell you a whole paragraph or more about your disability. So it explains it in detail what it is. Then it also offers accommodation ideas and what accommodations that might be associated with a person with that disability. And then it even offers links to purchase those items. So it has just like a full comprehensive map of a specific disability and what might be needed to help you accommodate that disability and what your needs are. So that is a really great tool that I highly recommend that you get familiar, especially with 1, 2, and 3. Knowing those things is going to be super important for you. Vocational rehabilitation. So vocational rehabilitation, I've heard mixed things. I work with them mainly. If you don't have a great experience with VR or a vendor, don't give up. That's my advice. There's been a lot of turnover. There are multiple offices and locations that you can try. So if you didn't have a good experience with one office, try another one. It might be a little further away from you, but that's okay. Or ask for a different VR counselor. See if you can work with somebody else. You also have informed choice. So VR is a federally and state funded program that is free for you to access. And once you sign up with them, you have access to certain things like vocational evaluations to determine those career interests and aptitude. You also can get paired with a job coach like myself or an organization like the Grow Group, where we can help you with a benefits analysis to understand SSI, SSDI, that vocational evaluation to determine your career interests and aptitudes. They can do psychological assessments for you. And then, of course, like I said, they can pair you with a job coach to help you with all of these things that we're talking about: self-advocacy, support, accommodations, disclosure. I wanted to include the stat here because I think it's important that nearly 60% of people with autism in the US are employed after receiving vocational rehabilitation services. Again, these are state provided services for all people with disabilities. So any type of disability can qualify for this service. And at the end, I also include a directory for you to locate your local VR office. Last is the disability rights group. So in Florida, we have Disability Rights Florida, but across the nation, there are various disability rights groups, and they usually are state by state, but there can be ones that are local too and in your community. So I highly recommend you look up your local disability rights group. All right, so some legislation I wanted to include here. Again, that ADA is the provided civil rights protections and prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. They're responsible for enforcing things like making sure there's ramps and elevator access in the workplace. They're also there to make sure that you have your accommodation requests that you need. Again, you have to disclose disability in order to be protected by the ADA in a workplace. But this is something that I think you should absolutely familiarize yourself with. So I wanted to include it here, and I'll include the link at the end as well. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this one too ensures that all children, regardless of disability status, are entitled to a free and appropriate public education to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, independent living. So these are some of your historic legislation that have passed that protect you in the workplace and beyond. So I think it's important to include them here and important to familiarize yourself with these, not only for you, but for maybe your children or for other people that you know that may have disabilities as well. So knowing your legal rights is also going to be important, and it's also your responsibility. I did also want to include some autism specific legislation. A lot of these you can see are newer, like 2014, 2019. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I thought that they were important to include so that you can research these on your own and see how they may apply to you as an individual. But again, the more you know about yourself, the more you know about your disability, the more you can advocate for yourself and know your needs and your rights. So highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with the legislation I've included here and beyond. Okay. Some other supports and resources for accommodation and self-advocacy. This one is more recent, and this is for federal workplaces, which I know a lot of people do work federally. So this is an executive order on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workplace. It's pretty straightforward legislation, so I highly recommend that you read this and read it thoroughly and see how it applies to you as an individual. And then Autism Speaks, the autism response team. Well, the first one is to strengthen the federal workforce by promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But the Autism Response Team, ART, is an information and referral support for autism community. Their team members are certified resource specialists through Inform USA, and they're specifically trained to provide personalized information and resources to autistic individuals, families, service providers, and the community. So their website, Autism Speaks website, has a plethora of resources, not only for an individual with a disability, but for employers that are working with people with disabilities, specifically autism and beyond, and also for your supports. So if you have supports that you want them to understand your disability a little bit more, they have lots of free resources here, even classes that they can take where they can learn more about how to communicate effectively with you, what your disability might entail, and what are some ways that they can support you at home and at work. So really, really great resource. Okay, this is the last topic that we're going to be covering. This is awareness and disclosure. So this is something that, I get the most questions about, right? How do I make other people aware? How do I disclose my disability? We've learned a lot about communication, right? How to communicate your strengths, how to advocate for yourself, how to understand your accommodations. You've learned that you need to know as much as possible about your disability. And you've also learned some resources like regarding your accommodation and legal rights. So again, it's up to you to take those things that I've taught you so far, to do your homework, to see what works for you. So now, how do you disclose? So you've kind of put this picture together. Okay, this is how I communicate. These are my strengths. These are the accommodations that I need. How do I disclose this to my employer? Okay, so first and foremost, I always work with my clients to identify where they're having the most trouble. Is it when they're applying for their job, right? So if it's when you're applying for your job, do you have a job coach? Can you lean on a job coach? If you don't have a job coach, that's okay too. You can reach out to your network, right? That support network, and say, hey, can you help me look at these job applications and go in through that job description and find out what my strengths are and kind of check those off with me? That will help you too, to kind of prepare you. The other thing too is to look and see and find these workplaces that have those ERGs, those resource groups, the EAPs, the DEI initiatives that we talked about, right? Go on their websites, see if they have those things in place, because those are the places that are going to support you the most naturally, right? Those are going to be the places that have those systems already in place for you to be successful at work. And then the Autism Speaks Toolkit. So this, again, from the Autism Speaks website, this provides tools and tips for planning and preparing for employment. It includes an overview of career options, resume and interview advice, disclosure and accommodation request advice, and legal rights afforded for people with disabilities. So another great resource, right? So these can also help you before you apply to that job. So doing your research a little bit of time, working with your supports, researching the company, and then putting it all together before you apply. It's in an interview, right? So if it's in an interview, can you request an alternative interview? Can you ask them, maybe you're really uncomfortable with being in person, right? Maybe you need to say, hey, I would actually prefer if this is a virtual interview. Is that a possibility? Can you request that ahead of time? Doing those informational interviews, again, doing your research, seeing what the company looks like. Can you do a company tour? Can you go into that company and, kind of see what it looks like before you apply to a job there? See what accommodations, that can also kind of help you scope out what accommodations that you might need in that workspace. Looking on those websites like we talked about, right? Going to Glassdoor and seeing the reviews on there, going on Indeed, looking at the reviews, and don't just go off those reviews, right? Go off of what people that actually work there are saying, right? So don't let those reviews scare you. Sometimes you might get a few disgruntled people. So that's why it's important to do your own research and try to talk to the people that work there. Again, attending those networking events, if you know that company is going to be there and you want to learn more about them and you see that they're going to be at a job fair, might be a great time to grab a job coach or a friend or somebody, or peer in your support group, to go with you to that job fair and actually talk to somebody that works at that company. Okay. The more you're prepared, the better. Right. So prepare for that job interview as much as you possibly can. Working with your friends and family too, asking them to prepare with you, asking you interview questions beforehand, researching online what type of interview questions are typical for the type of position you're applying. The more you prepare, the better that you're going to feel in that job interview. Is it once you're offered the job, right? So if you're determining your accommodation needs ahead of time, and then you're consulting with HR and your job coach, you can do a worksite visit or a tour, right? So checking with their company's HR department to see what resources are available, or if you can meet with HR to discuss the accommodation and supports that may be needed. Okay, so if you feel like, oh, no problem, I can apply, I can definitely do an interview, I'm not scared of those, I've got those down, but once I'm offered the job, like, how do I request my accommodations? Like, what do I need? Well, first and foremost, you need to know what those are, right? Second, if you're working with a job coach, you can work with them to see what's the best way for me to disclose. And we're going to get to disclosure in a second. If not, can you meet with HR and say, hey, these are some things that I might need to be successful in the workplace based on my disability, if you're willing to disclose. If not, these are some requests that you may be able to soft disclose, and we'll get to that. Again, doing that worksite tour is really going to help you to understand the environment that you're going to be working in, or doing your own research and asking people that work there. Lastly, is it while you're on the job? So job coaches, counselors, resource groups, they can all help with finding appropriate ways to handle difficult situations. So again, if you're having trouble at work, rather than like talking to everybody in your office about what's going on and how you're feeling, or shutting down completely, whatever the way that you handle that situation, leaning on your support network is going to be a really great option for you to help you handle those situations. So when you leave work, can you call your counselor and talk to them about a situation you had and how you might be able to handle it better tomorrow? Can you call your job coach and let them know what's going on and see if they have any advice, or that they can come in and offer some support to you as an accommodation, right? Talking to your friends and family, like, hey, this happened at work today, I'm not really sure how to handle it, or we have a big meeting tomorrow and I'm really nervous, right? The more that you reach out to those supports, the more success you're going to find on the job, and being able to not let those things hinder or become a barrier to your success. If you're still having difficulties, as always, we recommend, going to human resources and talking to them as well. So now we're going to get into, I've got 10 minutes left. And so I'm going to go right into our disclosures. So these are the ones that people really want to know the most about. Again, Autism Speaks did a great job of providing some visuals. These are visuals I use with my clients. These are ones that I use with my job coaches that I'm training that start. So I figure what better place to share them than with you all. So this first one is non-disclosure. What is non-disclosure? You may not be obligated to disclose if you're requesting an accommodation. And what does that look like? So these are kind of ordinary requests, right, to handle a typical issue in the workplace. So generally, you wouldn't need to disclose if you're asking a supervisor to explain confusing instructions. I do that all the time. I'm like, can you repeat that? I have my notes right here next to me. Like, can I write this down? Those sometimes don't necessarily need, like, hey, I'm neurodiverse, I need you to repeat that, right? It doesn't necessarily need a hard disclosure, like we call it. Telling a coworker that you just want to relax and play a game on the phone instead of socializing at lunch doesn't necessarily need disclosure. Okay, you can just say, hey, I'm having a rough day, I kind of want to just go outside, or I'm going to go for a walk and call my sister or my friend. Those you don't necessarily need to disclose. Those are very ordinary requests that can help you handle issues that you're having in the workplace. Adjustments that don't involve any permanent change to the environment. So if you see everybody's wearing headphones at work and you have your own noise canceling headphones, you can pop those in, and you don't necessarily need to disclose that these are special noise canceling headphones, right? So just like an ordinary request where a disclosure may not be appropriate or necessary. Soft disclosure. So soft disclosure is when you're talking more about the barrier than the diagnosis. And that's kind of the easiest way to put it. So consider ways that you can address these on your own. Like, can you bring in a lamp for your desk and turn off a light? Can you wear headphones? Can you record notes during a meeting? Remember, knowing your accommodations and understanding how you can present your best work is going to help you proactively identify what you need to be successful. They give a great example of a soft disclosure here. So again, it's talking not about the diagnosis, but more about the barrier. So for an example, an employee can inform their supervisor that they're getting headaches working under fluorescent bulbs in the workplace due to sensitivity to bright lights. They can point out it's affecting their work and request softer light bulbs or different lighting over their workspace. So again, they're not saying, hey, I have autism or I am neurodiverse, these lights are too bright, I need you to change them. Instead they're just saying, hey, these lights give me a headache. Is it okay if I turn them off? Or is it okay if I bring in a lamp or something for my desk? That doesn't necessarily render a disclosure, or you don't have to disclose in that situation, right? Another one, again, for a soft disclosure could be like, when you're telling me directions and telling me what to do, it's easier for me if I can write down what you're saying. Can I write down and take notes as you're telling me this? Or when you're giving me instructions, I really need them to be clear in order for me to understand what you're saying. So when you're saying them down, is it okay if we have a recap meeting later this week so that I can understand that I'm doing it correctly, right? So those things I'm not disclosing. I'm just saying, these are some barriers I might have in the workplace, and these are some options that I have that might help me, and then asking if that's okay, right? So if you feel like maybe not, right? Maybe there's something that you need the employer to support you here. Like, you need them to be able to provide something for you, or you need to bring in something in order for you to be successful at work that maybe other people do not have, right? Is it something that needs outward support, or you can work with a job coach like behind the scenes for support? Remember, there's not a one size fits all type for disclosure. So any scenario could call for any one of these types of disclosure, and it is individualized. So this is based on you. This is not a blanket approach, and this is not saying like, okay, you should all do these types of disclosures. It's what's going to work best for you, and only you can determine that. You can lean on your supports to know which ones might work best for you and how to deliver these types of disclosures. But again, it's ultimately up to you and what you're comfortable with. And remember, once you do disclose your disability, the ADA is intended to protect a person with a disability. So when you disclose as a person with a disability, you should have those protections in place by the ADA. So making sure that it's like a formal disclosure. And again, the Autism Speaks gives a great example here. So a hard disclosure is when a job seeker employee shares their diagnosis, typically with their supervisor or human resources department in a formal way, like through a meeting with at least another person present, or in writing. They usually do this if they need to formally request an accommodation to assist them in their job. Some examples can include ergonomic equipment, like a chair with armrest, recorded directives or messages or materials, so you need to record it using a special device, modified breaks, so you might have to take more breaks or shorter breaks or use STEM devices, or just leave in the middle of a meeting to take a break and stretch out. Those type of things might require a hard disclosure. Okay, so again, formally requesting an accommodation, you can refer back to the ADA to see what accommodation rights you have legally once you do disclose your disability to your employer. And then also, again, working with your support groups to determine which type of disclosure is the best, and then how to do that, present that to the employer. So anticipating where you may have trouble and identifying the best way to disclose. If you're not sure when to disclose, I just wanted to share a couple scenarios. But again, it is individualized. It needs to work for you. And if you're going to do it up front, you just need to know the accommodations that you need, and you need to know your strengths and how to communicate them. So if you're disclosing during an interview, this is kind of an example of a soft disclosure during an interview. So you're presenting it as a strength, but you're being honest about your needs, right? So if they ask you that question, can you tell me, why we should hire you, or what are some of your strengths in the workplace? You might answer as, I have great attention to detail. I will never forget the assignments that you give me, and I'm very diligent and serious about my work. However, I may not pick up on sarcasm or social cues, and I might need more of straightforward direction and communication in order to do my job effectively, right? So that was kind of more of a soft disclosure, letting them know, like, I'm not here to socialize, or I'm not really great at it. I need more of that, like, straightforward, tell me what I need to do so I can go get my job done, and I promise you I'm going to get it done, right? Disclosing post-job offer, right? So if you determine you need an accommodation or support, you may have an option to work with a job coach to help with disclosing post-job offer. But if not, use the resources I shared with you. Go to Ask Jan. Look at what the accommodations you might need are. Go to the ADA. See what your rights are. See how you can present these in the best light to your employer. Again, it's what you're comfortable with. It's your individualized approach and strategy, and lean on your support network to help you with that. You can talk to HR about your disability and confidentiality and your needs for accommodation. Okay, and remember to know what those accommodation needs are prior to asking them is going to be really helpful. So again, example, I need the lights turned off in my office, or can I change those? Can we change those light bulbs so that they're a lot dimmer? Those are specific requests, and they're going to have to make a workplace modification. So HR is going to need to know that, right? So those are some things that you may disclose to HR. If no accommodations are needed from the employer, then you can determine if a non-disclosure or soft disclosure is more appropriate, and then determine your delivery, right? Again, doing your research, knowing what you need, knowing what VR can provide as well. So sometimes VR is, if you're working with vocational rehabilitation and say you need a workspace modification, that is something that they may be able to assist you with. Or if you need special noise canceling headphones, they may be able to purchase those items for you. So VR can also be a great resource to provide you with some of those accommodation needs and help you to work with a job coach to explain those to your HR department. Excuse me. Okay. So we're almost at time, which we're right at the end here. I did want to include some additional resources for the job seeker. This first one is a vocational rehabilitation directory. So this is for nationwide. It gives you a list of the different VR offices that may be close to you so that you can work with them and a job coach. CARD is a great resource. Excuse me. It's the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. It's one of the world's largest and most experienced applied behavior analysis treatment providers. They are a great organization. I've worked with a lot in the past here in Florida. Not only will they provide support, behavioral support to an individual that is neurodiverse or is autistic, but they also will go into an employer and work with the employer on understanding what neurodiversity is. And they will also work with employees as well to help create those natural supports. And it's a free service. So if you are at work and your employer is open to having CARD come in, I would highly recommend you reach out to CARD first, see what their resources are in your area, and see if they can help you or your employer as well. The ADA, I've harped on this a lot today, making sure you do your research for your legal rights. Number 4 is the federal workforce recruitment. This is for students. They recruit college students and recent graduates with disabilities for a database that managers will use to hire for internships or permanent jobs. And so this is a really good workforce website that you can use to look for jobs and put yourself out there. And then Autism Speaks, sorry, I have a misspelling there, but that website also links there for you as well so that you can review their resources. I wanted to include links for employers because I'm sure there are some employers on this call today, and these are some resources that employers can review if they're interested in developing these programs that we talked about, if they're interested in working with VR, and knowing their rights as employers as well and how they can help and how they can do better for people who are neurodiverse. I highly recommend you go through these links. Our organization offers DEI consulting for employers as well. So if you need us to come in and do a worksite analysis to see how you can create some DEI initiatives in your workplace, the Grow Group is happy to meet with you and do that as well. So I know we're out of time, but it was my pleasure to work with you. I hope I shared enough information for you to feel a little bit better about your job search and a little bit better about employment, and putting yourself out there in the best light possible. Because again, remember, you are uniquely you, and there's nobody else like you. And it's important that you can communicate that and advocate that for yourself so that you can put yourself with your best foot forward in the workplace. So thank you guys so much for having me today. It was a pleasure being here.